My name is Jim Kemper, and I am an alcoholic. And hi right back to you. I come from Chicago, and one of the things I miss is that hi. I came on the program in Los Angeles, where they can say hi louder than anybody, even you, and I missed it since I moved to Chicago. I just want to say that since I got here yesterday afternoon, I've had the best darn time that I've had in a long while. There's something about coming to one of these big conferences and seeing so many people like myself, and rubbing elbows and rattling around and drinking the coffee and listening to the conversation and the lies and the, you know, and it's just a great feeling, and you've all been so nice. I got the biggest kick this afternoon when a lovely lady from Al-Anon knocked on my door at the hotel, and I opened the door, and there she was standing with a beautiful basket of fruit, and this was such a thoughtful thing. And you know, it just shows that these Al-Anons know their alcoholics pretty well, because the minute she shut the door, I took the wrapping off the top of that basket of fruit, and I pushed through this beautiful, shiny, fresh fruit to find the chocolate bars that I knew would be there, and that she knew I'd probably look for first. But it's been great to be here, and I want to say also that there are a lot of strangers here to me, and I put strangers in quotation marks when I'm with AAs, because you can't be strangers with people who know you better than your own family does just by knowing that you're an alcoholic. But it was a great thing to run into Herb Lancaster. There goes your anonymity, Herb. He ain't got none, he says, from Chattanooga, whom I've known for years. And I've heard, Herb is the only man I've ever heard quote Abraham Lincoln and make him sound like a Confederate, which he does regularly. My family is a family that is knit together by Alcoholics Anonymous. I met my wife on the program. She has been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous since January 1958. My oldest son has been sober in AA since February 1965. You know, there's three members of this family that understand each other, at least. And on the other side of the ledger, though, and I think we in AA have to look at this, because we're the best people to carry the message. There's another member of my family, a fairly close relative, who at the age of 40 was found dead in a fourth-rate hotel room, surrounded by empty bottles, wine bottles and pill bottles, and he'd been there for days. 40 years old, and with a brilliant man with a great career ahead of him. And there are others in my family and others in your families that are still suffering, and they tell us there are 9 million people in this country who have not, by the grace of God, found the thing that we've found. To me, beyond the imperative necessity of maintaining my own sobriety, the most important thing in my life is to do whatever I'm able to do, whether it's much or little, to try and reduce that 9 million to a smaller figure. And I think Harold said it so well last night when he, in that wonderful way he has of getting a message across indirectly, made it clear that to him the carrying the message in the 12-step was the program. And I believe this too. Incidentally, I enjoyed his talk so much as I did Valerie's, and after Harold had finished his talk, somebody that was sitting with me in the back and that knew I was going to talk tonight looked at me with a kind of a gleam in his eye and said, "That's going to be a hell of a hard act to follow." And then somebody else says, "Well, you're not supposed to be funny. We don't expect you to follow it."
So I was relieved to know that. The book says that we tell what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. And I find that I feel more comfortable the closer I follow the book. I know pretty well what I used to be like. I ought to. And where there are some gaps in this, there have always been people who were quite willing to fill them in for me and let me know. And I know what happened. I do not know what I'm like now. And I expect that I will finish out my life really without knowing. And I don't especially care. One thing I'm like now is I'm sober. And I guess that's the most important thing. But the rest of it, I'm not smart enough to know what I'm like. And I think for all of us in AA, this changes almost daily. But I do know what I believe now. And so my talk has got to be what I used to be like, what happened, and what I believe now. On the used to be part of it, I get the feeling that there are two ways, really, that people get alcoholism. There are the people who seem always to have had it, who never did drink normally, right from scratch. And then apparently there are others who at least believe that they drank normally or not disastrously for a period of time and then crossed some kind of a line. We then converge and we're all alike when we get to this program. I was of the first type. I never drank normally. From the beginning, I wanted all I could get under the circumstances, and I drank to get drunk, and I drank for the feelings that I thought it gave me, and the release from self-consciousness and inhibitions and so forth and so on. In the early years, it wasn't that strong that I couldn't put the cork in the bottle after a few drinks if there was some overwhelming reason to do it. Such as if I were with my wife and she were on me about the drinking, or with my boss, or with an older relative, or I had something important that I had to do the next morning. I could reluctantly put the cork in the bottle in those early years. I never wanted to, but I could stop after a few drinks. But that went pretty fast, and I look back on my what I used to be like as a series of kind of key incidents, and the key incident to me, the turning point that if I had known it then, which I didn't, clearly said that I was alcoholic, happened at a time when I had graduated from law school and I had gone to work for the Department of Justice in Washington, and they had transferred me to New York to a regional office, and I had the job, but I hadn't passed the bar examination, and I had to take the bar examination in the District of Columbia. And at that point, having to carry on the job and do the studying, I went on the wagon for 2 months. Now, that in itself is kind of interesting, because I don't think anybody goes on the wagon that doesn't have a drinking problem. Now, you think about it for a minute. I mean, unless for some direct medical reason. Who else needs it? You know, the normal drinker is going to say, well, instead of having the 3 martinis before dinner, I'll have 1, or he'll find some way of moderating if he's under pressure. But you see, I knew inside me that I had a big job to do, and so I went on the wagon, and I think right there I was delivering myself a message that I had this thing. And I stayed on the wagon for 2 months, and I worked my tail off, and I was ready to go. And I got on a train in New York to go to Washington to take the bar exam, and I went in the club car, and I sat down to read Time magazine, and the fellow sitting next to me ordered a bourbon, and I thought, well, God, 2 months, a long time, and I'm all tensed up, and I can do this thing better if I'm relaxed. And so I never took the exam. When I got to Washington, I was drunk, and I went into a hotel, and I didn't come out of it for 3 days. Now, I'm inclined to think that was alcoholic behavior. And, you know, there's something, this kind of thing tracked me through the remaining years until I got to this program. This business of getting drunk at the worst possible time. And I know many of you have done this kind of thing. How many New Year's Eves I've gone through and, you know, after the lecture from the wife and so on, and okay. So I'm wandering around with the ginger ale in my hand on New Year's Eve while everybody else is getting drunk. And I'm being very noble, you know, and, thank you, I'm just having a ginger ale. And then they, you know, if they're normal, I don't know. But anyway, the heavy drinkers that seem to get away with it, the next day they're getting over their hangover and getting ready to go to the office on Monday. And the day after New Year's night, I get drunk. And I don't get to the office. The situation where you have an important appointment with a client, and it's 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, and I would work in the office all weekend to get ready if this was a big deal and it was important. Just, you know, not a drink, you know, really pound away at it. Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, I'm not there. They can't find me because I got drunk Monday night. I think they're, you know, the guys that dig into our psyches, and I don't mind if they dig, but whatever they come up with isn't too important to me because I don't understand it. But I guess that would be called suicidal. There's some kind of impulse that is moving towards some kind of suicide. You drink at the wrong times, you louse your life up, and so forth. I had a period in which I did this wagon business off and on. Then I began to get increasingly worried about the drinking, and by that time I had lost a wife and 2 children through divorce, which was due to my drinking. And I began experimenting, and every time I read chapter 3 of the big book, I have to laugh because I tried about everything that's in chapter 3. I'll only drink 1 martini before dinner, or I will only drink on Saturday. One time I went on the sherry wagon, and that was a disaster. That was worse than anything. It was better for me when I got back to Boilermakers. All of these little things, and usually I get away with them for a short while, but ultimately I would be back to the normal pattern, which by then, since this illness of ours gets progressively worse, was getting worse all the time. I had good jobs. I was practicing law at that time, and there was a sort of a pattern that I would go for a period of time without drinking, and I'd be in good with everybody at the office, and sometimes even at home. I'm now in the second marriage. One summer, in order to keep from drinking, I was living way out in the country, and I built a 685-foot fence around the place, and dug 86 post holes and painted it and did all the work myself. And I don't know how to hammer a nail, really, but I did projects. I got interested in the Episcopal Church. You see, not because of the content of the religion, but because there was, I worked my way up to junior warden very fast because I was an operator, and I was willing to do the things that people don't like to do, like go out and raise money and things like that. And it gave me a kind of a cover. The word cover is getting popular lately. It gave me a sort of a cover. But each of these things, the new wife, the new home, the new job, the church, the fence, the vegetable garden that I just about killed myself at one summer. These lasted for a short period of time, and then the important thing came back in my life, which was drinking. It was always more important than any of these other things, and it was just as though it kind of was lying in wait until the right time. And the day would come when I never knew. They talk about the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink, and I believe that. I would never know, and I can't go back and recollect what was happening in my mind at the moment I would take the first drink after one of these sessions on the wagon. It would be something like this. I'm going down in the elevator with one of the guys in the office, and I haven't had a drink saying, well, once I went 11 months on the wagon, but it usually be 4 weeks or 8 weeks or something. And things are in pretty good shape, and I'm going down the elevator, and he says, let's have a martini before we go home. Sure. Now, at that moment, all the bad experiences, the repeated examples of what always happened to me when I went back to that first martini, it was as if a wall had been raised between me and all past recollection. There was no conscious will. It was never a matter of my debating it. And this great fight that some people think we alcoholics have, is that the bunk? This great battle like Job wrestling with the Lord and so on. There's none of that. There's no battle. It's just, sure, I'll have a drink. When the time comes, that little thing and that little thing in the mind doesn't click, the little red light doesn't go on, and there's a forgetter up in there. And, it isn't that I needed to drink physically at that point. It isn't that I consciously needed it mentally. Usually this would happen when there were no excuses. Nobody'd been nasty to me, and there'd been no... In fact, it usually happened when things were going very well. But the forgetter would take over, and I'd take the drink. I moved out to California in 1952. I left the best job I'd ever had, where I was making a lot of money for a relatively young man, 38 years old. I just moved. I just went, and today I couldn't give you all the reasons. Now, they say the geographical cure. It happened to have followed a pretty bad drunk, but I had a chance to do something out there, and I went there, and that opened the dam, because somehow from that time on, I lost my ability to be a periodic, and I got into the final pattern, which for me was typically the 3-day drunk, and then real sick at the end of that, and then shaking it out. I would never go to a hospital, a doctor, or anybody. I struggled with it. And I drank Coca-Cola. I drank 2 cases of Coca-Cola in one day when I was trying to get out of this, and eat 30 or 40 Milky Ways. It's a great, great balanced diet. I still like Milky Ways and Coke. And I'd shake and shudder, and I'd get out of it, and then I'd go and take the drink, and I'd have another 3 days. The 3 days was about all I was good for. Still trying to hold down a job. Finally, one Thanksgiving, I disappeared from Wednesday until Sunday, and I got back, and that scene took place that so many of us know about. That I've never known anybody but an alcoholic that fully understands what it is like to wake up and to have fear before you are fully awake. As you come to consciousness in the morning, the fear is in there like a stone, and you don't know what you're afraid of. It's fear. There's a long word for this I've forgotten. It begins numus something or other, but the fear is there, and you don't know what it is yet because you haven't remembered what you did wrong yet. And my wife was sitting there by the bedside, and I spoke before she did, and I said, I know, now don't tell me, don't tell me, I know. And she said, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I don't know, just don't talk to me. So I got through that day, and I went down to the office Monday morning, and I looked up Alcoholics Anonymous in the Los Angeles telephone book. Now, I'd never read an article on AA that I can remember. I knew it existed, but I knew nothing about it, and I hadn't read the Jack Anderson article. I didn't, I knew there was such a thing. And then right off the bat, my arrogance still, arrogant and supercilious and just jerk, really. because I got the gal Sybil, who I think Sybil still runs that central office. I'm not sure. And she answered the phone, and I said, I think I have a drinking problem. And she kind of laughed, and she said, well, fine. Would you like to talk to somebody? And I said, yes, I sure would. And she said, well, give me your name and telephone number, and I'll have someone call you. I said, oh, no, I'm not going to give you my name and telephone number. I said, I'm a practicing attorney here in Los Angeles, and I can't let it get out that, anything like this. I said, you give me the name and telephone number of somebody I can call. And she said, fine, I will. And I said, now, I'd like to have it be a lawyer. And I said, about my age. I said, I'm about 40. And I said, I'm a lawyer, and I think I'd, get along better with somebody like that. And she played it straight. And she gave me the name of a lawyer. And I went over to see Fred right then, that morning. I knew if I waited 5 minutes after I hung up the phone, I wouldn't get there. I called him and I said, I want to come see you. He said, fine. And I began to get some surprises because, you see, my idea of Alcoholics Anonymous was that a lawyer who was a member of AA had got to have his office down somewhere around the corner of 5th and Main Street in some kind of a loft or a warehouse. And here this guy was in one of the best office buildings in downtown Los Angeles. And, I went in, lawyers look at other lawyers' evidences of prosperity. You see how thick the carpet is. And boy, it was all there. And this guy was great. I spent 2 hours with him. He told me his story. And as he talked, he just built the cage around me. Oh, brother. Because except for the fact that his last 2 years had been on Skid Row, which I had not experienced, right up to about that point, it was like like he'd been reading my mail, as we say. The same kind of thinking, the same marital experience, the same business of drinking at the worst possible times, the attempts to go on the wagon, et cetera, et cetera. It was just, And when he got through, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't feel I'm ready to talk much about myself, but I'll tell you this. I guess I'm an alcoholic, from what you tell me. What do I do? And he said, well, I belong to the South Pasadena San Marino group, and we meet day after tomorrow over at the Women's Club, and he said, I'll take you to the meeting, and then in the meantime, I'd suggest you go to the bookstore and get the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can read that ahead of time. And he said, he said, now let me tell you a little bit about the 12 steps. Well, he lost me. He lost me. I said, Fred, I'm not going to, what do I go to a meeting for? I said, in Pasadena, especially in San Marino, that's where I live. And I said, anyway, I'm not a joiner. I just don't join things. Well, I had my wallet was that thick with cards from stuff I joined, but I didn't want to join this. The 12 steps, I didn't buy any part of that. I couldn't see that point. And the idea of going into a bookstore and asking for a book called Alcoholics Anonymous, I think that's what really finished me. So I was polite and I thanked him and I said, Fred, I guess I am an alcoholic, but the rest of this I'm not sure about. I'd like to think about it for a while. And he said, well, get in touch when you'd like to. Then I had 4 weeks, which were the worst of my life. I walked out of that place and I knew that I was, I had it. But I was just filled with fear because this guy had convinced me what was going to happen. He talked in very brutal terms about the ding-a-ling factories and the people that died of all the various things you died of, and I was deadly afraid and I couldn't quench the fear with booze because I was too afraid to do that. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, of course, I cracked. And then to me, as I look back on it, it seems to me that I spent the next 4 months trying to qualify. I seemed almost compulsively to be doing the things that Fred told me he'd done that I hadn't done yet. Including one incident in which, except for the grace of God, I would have been responsible for the death of my 2-year-old daughter. And even that didn't get me back to Alcoholics Anonymous. Then I did another disappearing act for 10 days, and everybody has to have his last drunk. It's always the worst and it's always the best. And this was the worst and the best. 10 days, and during that time I was in New York and Chicago and around various places, and I subsisted on beer and vodka and bourbon and Seconal and Dexedrine and chocolate milkshakes. And I don't recommend it. During that time, my little nephew who lived with his mother and father in McKinney, Texas, was 5 years old. This was over Memorial Day. And he jumped in a swimming pool and was instantly killed with a cerebral hemorrhage. And my sister went into shock, and they couldn't find me, and there was nobody she talked to but me. And finally, it took me 3 days then to get to McKinney. And I always have to believe that I came to this program because of shame. I don't think it's important what you come for. You know, if you come here because your boss says, I'll fire you if you get drunk again, or if, the jailer is the reason, or what the reason is. In my case, it was shame. The other things, somehow, I was too arrogant, I guess, to be motivated by the normal reasons, but shame, and I had shame when I got off that plane and had to look at my sister and my brother-in-law, and they hadn't been able to find me, and that was it. So I went to he's an Episcopal clergyman, and she's a doctor. I had the right pair for what I needed, I guess, at that moment. And I remember I got to their house, and my brother-in-law said, "You certainly look like you need a drink." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he went in the kitchen, and he had about that much bourbon and a bottle of Old Fitz in the refrigerator. God. I mean, all places to have it. And I call that quite crude, frankly. But he poured it all out into a glass, and I drank it, and that is the last drink that I've had, and that was June 5, 1954. Now, and I got back to AA. You know, it was funny, too, when I got back to Los Angeles the next day, and I called Fred. It was a Monday. And I got my first AA resentment because he just laughed. He just laughed on the phone. He said, "I figured you were just about due." I'd like to talk most of the rest of the time about my first year on the program because I have issued kind of a challenge that hasn't yet been met. I have never met anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous that made as many stupid mistakes as I did during the first year on the program without getting drunk. Never. And the only thing I can attribute this to is the one thing that, although I was doing everything wrong, I went to meetings all the time. Now, there comes a time, I believe, when just the attendance at meetings won't do the trick. There comes a time, a period of grace that we have, perhaps, and then you got to start working the program. But I was sustained just by this 4, 5, 6 meetings a week when I was doing all the things that should have got me drunk. But I went to that first meeting, and I'll never forget it because, you see, I hadn't been welcome anywhere for a long time. No longer in my home. The relatives You know, I was like a time bomb if I went into somebody's house, and they never knew what was going to happen. And I had no friends. And I owed money to everybody, borrowing Peter to pay Paul and all this stuff. And I was no good, you know, as a citizen or a father or a husband or a law partner or anything else. And I wasn't welcome. And the minute I walked in that meeting, this instant thing of knowing, you know, I was welcome right off the bat. And I remember my sponsor, the first member of AA, other than himself, that he introduced me to was a lady school teacher. And I thought, my God, you know, they have lady school teachers in this thing? I could hardly believe it. And in about 1 minute, she and I were swapping lies on how we hid bottles. Fabulous. And then the next one I met was a great man, 70 years old, and I was then 40, and I looked, you know, like I was 70 and he was 40. The pouches under my eyes had pouches. I was in terrible shape, and I looked at this man and I thought, God, if I could only look like that. And the two speakers, it was an open meeting. They were, you know, I dug everything they said, and I became a member. In a matter of days, I'd read the big book, I'd read all the literature, I could recite the 12 steps from memory. But then, he said it was time I made a talk at an AA meeting. I've been studying this situation very, very carefully, and I had a lot of ideas, and they weren't being expressed in the meetings I went to. I had done some very deep self-psychoanalysis about my childhood, which established the fact that there were a lot of people responsible for the emotional basis for my alcoholism. And people weren't talking about this kind of thing at meetings, and I thought they needed it, so I worked around, and I finally, one night, the first speaker, who normally takes in L.A., 10, 15 minutes, didn't show. And the main speaker usually takes about 45, and he was there. So, oh, wow. I said, Jim, how about you? You want to fill that spot? Well, you betcha I want it. I have my notes in my pocket. I've been carrying them around just in case. So I got up there, and 45 minutes later, I still hadn't taken my first drink. And the chairman finally had to come up to me, and in the nicest way, he said, Jim, we all enjoyed the first half of your pitch. He said, we'll invite you back to finish it some other time. So, another resentment. Then I got into this question of amends. And I thought that was pretty good. I made up two lists of people. One was the list of the people that I had really hurt, the ones close to me. My former wife, my current wife, from whom I was sort of separated at that time, a couple of business partners, and actually there were several that I had really damaged, and then a much longer list of people who lived out of town that I had, where you owed somebody an apology, and I thought, well, I'll start with that one first. Just wrong, that's the easy one. I'll start with where I could write letters instead of having to sit down and look somebody in the eye, and make amends or talk about these things. So I sent out these letters, and I tell you, you wouldn't believe them. A typical example that I remember is I'd been to a party at a lady's home in outside New York City and misbehaved. And I kind of liked this lady. She'd been a friend of my family. So the letter went out to her, Dear Mrs. So-and-so, I want to apologize for getting drunk at your lovely lawn party last Labor Day and passing out under the bushes so that you had to have your security man come and take me away. Paragraph. You will be glad to know that I have joined Alcoholics Anonymous and I do not drink anymore. And I sent this kind of thing out all over and then waited for the applause. And, of course, nobody answered my letters. And so I began to build up more resentments. Then the business. I figured so many people had said to me, you could really be you're a fine attorney, and you could do so well if you don't have this drinking situation. And so I thought, now the business is going to start to pour in. And lawyers measure the volume of business, but a lawyer can look at his morning mail and he knows how he's doing. If there's a lot of airmail letters in there, he's doing okay. If it's all fourth-class stuff, advertising law books and so on, he's not doing okay. And mine was still the fourth-class mail. And it went on week after week, and I thought, what's the matter? Here I am being sober. I'm doing what people think I should do. Why aren't things coming in my direction? More resentment. Then there was a matter of my wife. Now, the Lord knows she had told me often enough that she loved me, and that it was just this drinking, and it was the things I did drinking, and the insecurity that she felt, and so forth and so on. Well, I wasn't drinking. But I want to tell you, nothing was happening at home either. We were still living in that great phrase, under the same roof, which had been for a long time. And I thought, things ought to be kind of, improving. No, not a thing. So finally one day I said to her, I want to have a talk with you. This was a switch. This was a real switch. I said, would you please come into the study? So we went into the study, and I closed the door, and I had the big book with me. I'd gotten a brand new copy of the big book. I said, now, this is the book Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, it's written for alcoholics, not for wives of alcoholics, but there's one chapter in there on the family and the family attitude toward the alcoholic. And there's a lot of good basic Christian principles in here about how to treat other people. Why don't you read it? So she read it, and a week later, she left. And she was right to leave. Now, you see, what I'm getting at is, you can't do this. And 5-6 meetings a week is not enough if the individual is unpracticing the program the way I was. I was a setup to get drunk, and I didn't know it. I thought I was a darn good AA. Didn't I go to meetings, and didn't I do 12-step work, and et cetera, et cetera. But I was a setup, and the moment came. And I must say, I guess this is why, more than any other single thing, I believe in a power greater than myself. I believe that God acts because of this incident. I'd been on the program somewhere between 10, 11 months. And I was having lunch one day with one of my uncles. Now, this man, all his life had been a heavy drinker. I don't think he'd had a day since he was 21 he hadn't put away a fifth. Never seemed to faze him. He used to make me so damn mad. And I occasionally drank with him. And, he'd be right along, and like a rock, though, pouring this stuff down. He could drive his car home steady, be up the next morning at 7:30 eating ham and eggs and so on while I was throwing up. And we're having lunch. I'm eating. He's on his third martini. And he looked up at me, and he said, say, I did you a favor last night. I said, what was it? He said, well, your aunt and I were at a party, and Mrs. So-and-so came up and said, weren't you shocked to find out that young Jim is an alcoholic? And I said, well, what did you tell her? Well, he said, I told her, you're no alcoholic. You're just a thimble-belly that never learned how to hold his booze. He looks at me like this. And in a matter of seconds, it's funny what the psychology does. It was a cool day, but in a matter of seconds, I was covered with sweat, and I was shaken, and I couldn't talk. You see, I had no defense, and I only had one thought in my mind as I got up and walked away from the table and got in my car and drove to the house, and the one thought was, I'll show that SOB that I'm no alcoholic. Now, you talk about insanity. It's so, people tell me today, well, he can't be an alcoholic because he's had such a good education. Or some dumb thing like that. Here I was, I'd had a good education, and I was fairly bright and so forth, and I'd had 10 months of constant meetings. Total insanity. I'll show that SOB. And I got to the house, and there was nobody home, and I went right into the kitchen and took the bottle. We kept alcohol now. Took the bottle of Old Fitz out of the cupboard and put it on the counter and took the cork out and got a glass down and got down on my knees. And I don't know why. I have no reason to know. There was nothing in my up here that made me do that, but I did. And I just got down there for a little while, and I didn't have one of these great, flashing spiritual experiences and so forth. But I didn't take the drink, and I got up, and I didn't want the drink. And then, from that time on, I began to try and do things right. First thing I did was call Fred. Fred said, I haven't heard from you in a long while. I see you around the meetings, but you seem to like the other social elements at the meetings. And I said, Fred, what in the hell's the matter with me? I said, I almost took a big drink and got drunk last night. He said, did you ever hear of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? I said, yeah. I think I know what you're getting at. So I went back and I did it over again, and I found a guy about my age who'd been sober a couple of years, and we liked each other, and we had some of the same outlooks on many things, and we took the fifth step together. We took 3 long evenings to do this. I personally believe that the fifth step is the gateway to a comfortable sobriety. So many of people I know have never taken it. And okay, that's, if anybody that's staying sober, I don't believe in saying, well, you ought to do this or you ought to do that. But I had to do it because it got rid of so much garbage. And I didn't have to skulk around anymore and feel guilty and remorseful. And I chose, I think wisely, another male AA to do it rather than a clergyman, because that happened to be right for me. For many people, a clergyman is right or whatever. But anyway, I got through that, and then I got back to the amends, and I found out an interesting thing that had never occurred to me, that the people against whom I had the worst resentments were the people I had hurt the most. And try that sometime. Without exception, the people that I hated, that I had the kind of resentments that kept me awake nights, and the thing that can get us to drinking, were the same people I'd done the most damage to. The resentment, I guess, was a kind of a backfire, kind of a defense against the guilt of the way I'd hurt them. I'd have to rationalize it and make them out to be worse than I was, I guess. So I found myself trying to make amends to the people, not only the people that I had hurt the most, but the people I hated, really. And I had picked up one new one, an AA member, since I joined the fellowship, so the list had grown. And I was rebuffed, particularly in 2 situations. I was rebuffed by my second wife, who I think wisely decided that the marriage was over, and that was hard to take because I had decided it was not. But I had a great sponsor, and he worked through this with me, and he kept reminding me that the thing is to make the amends, not the response that you get. You're not doing this for what you can accomplish in results. You're doing it to get it out of you. And my former law partner in Los Angeles wouldn't even see me. The next time we met was at an AA meeting. That was lovely. That was great. God, we cried on each other's shoulders, you know. Told each other what SOBs we'd both been. And of course, he had become a member. And I would say this, since I began to try some things I believe, now I'm to what I believe. I believe that what counts for me is not the result but the effort. And I look at one day, and one day I think I'm doing, I'm doing all right in practicing the 12 steps. The next day, no. And it varies. And you get into different situations, and sometimes you bat 100, and sometimes you bat 300. I never batted higher than that on this program, but I think it's the effort. If I am trying, if I'm honestly trying, I believe I'll stay sober. And I also believe that I will be comfortable. Now, I've heard an awful lot about being happy in AA, and there are many happy moments there. We make ourselves available for ecstasy. We know we can experience ecstasy when we're sober on this program. We may or may not have it, but we become eligible for it. And sometimes it comes. And happiness, which may be the lesser degree of ecstasy, but to me the thing is that I can always be comfortable. I can be comfortable on this program when I'm not particularly happy, what I'm trying to get at. I can be comfortable in very difficult circumstances where the heart isn't pounding and the belly isn't sore and the feelings that we get when we have anger or resentment or whatever. And I believe that if I'm making an effort that I may have not only sobriety but what you call a comfortable sobriety. And, I'm sure there's something more than that in heaven, but at this point my mind is not capable of visualizing it. We were all in hell. We were talking at dinner. I was talking with Reverend Collins and Valerie, and he was saying that the old-fashioned clergy approach, telling the drunk, if you keep doing that, you'll go to hell. And I said, we're already there. That's no threat. And it's not, because that's where we are when we're drinking. And considering that, I can't visualize, whatever the fact may be, anything closer to heaven than what comfortable sobriety can be for an alcoholic like myself. I believe, what I've come to believe is that, and I've been all around the barn on this, and I've come back to the basic, that my objective must be sobriety. Now, there were times when I've had the feeling that sobriety is the means to get objectives. I should stay sober so that, and then you fill out the rest of the sentence after the so that you get your wife back, so that you make more money, so that, and so forth. But I don't believe in that. I believe that for me, the way this thing has to work is that both the means and the objective are sobriety. Alcoholics Anonymous, perhaps I should say, is the means, this program, this spiritual program, but the objective is the sobriety, and if I keep that, then the rest of it will fall into place. The rest of it's not in my control anyway. Things happen in your life, and they're going to happen or not happen, or they're going to happen in a certain way. But the sobriety means that whatever happens, you're there either to enjoy it, if that's what it is, or to handle it, if it's something that's not enjoyable. So to me, the aim of this spiritual program for an alcoholic like myself is sobriety. And then we see what comes along with that. I've had now 19 years, and I couldn't, this is almost a third of my life, and I couldn't have believed it could be that many years. And it doesn't seem like 19 years. The thing about this program is that that, whether it's 19 or 27 or 7, you are one with the individual who is here at his first meeting. There's a oneness that transcends the passage of time because we're each sober just today, and this is the day that counts and not yesterday, and we don't know how many of us are going to be sober tomorrow. I look back, and my wife and I, so when she had her 15th birthday last January, she made me count. She's not very good at mathematics. She had to take her fingers like this in 1958 because she didn't believe it. The time goes so fast, and the time goes so beautifully. I would like to say in conclusion that I never ever have anything to say in conclusion, because by the time I got there, I said what I wanted to say. I'm grateful. I am so grateful that there are no words that will express it. And my gratitude is specifically to people like the people in this room. And a great thing about an AA meeting is that you really don't ever have to say, God bless you, because you know that God has already blessed us. Thank you.